Hey, Danny.
Hey, good morning.
Good morning. I have another meeting, Maddie. All right, let's give it a second to see if anybody else shows up. We're gonna go over examples on the hypothesis, variables, and questions worksheet that's also on, here we go, another person. That's also on the same day on Canvas. Hey, Bella, there you are again. You could have stayed in the last meeting. I know, yeah. I saw you leave and stuff. You could have stayed. It really doesn't matter which class Zoom you show up for.
Oh, okay, because I realized it was 6 and I was like, oh, I had to go to a Zoom meeting too, so.
Yeah, it doesn't matter as long as you're not missing some other class. It's just a time to schedule it so that if you have like a 6-hour class, and if they have a Zoom going on, you should really go to theirs if it's important and you need to bring your grade up in that class, and then come to your biology class when you actually have biology. But it doesn't really matter because there's usually never more than like 3 or 4 people. I mean, the highest number of people I've had is 8, and even then that's not enough to like overload the server on Zoom. So I couldn't care less which one you show up for.
Okay.
Doesn't so hold on just a second. So yeah, if you guys want to pull up that document, I will share the document I'm talking about, and if you need me to show you where to find it, just say something. I'm gonna put out a quick announcement real quick on Canvas before we start.
Is there a way you can copy it into
you should be able to put it in Notability.
Box. Oh, okay.
Because that's how I got it on mine. Having multiple screens at one time is very complicated. All right. How's everybody doing?
Good.
Good.
Good. Yeah, I'm glad we finally I'm glad that we just finally know whether or not we're coming back. Like, I'm glad that it's like the state of Illinois and a lot of other states just finally made that decision and kind of just like said, this is it, this is what's happening, because the unknown was driving me crazy. The like not knowing is, all right, why can't I make this bigger?
I can't split screen mine.
Neither can I.
What now?
I can't split screen it.
Yeah, I don't know why. Do you see that I'm moving it up and down or no?
No.
No. All right, hold on a second. I did something wrong then. I'm gonna stop sharing and try again. You see me though, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's try that again. Hey, Kaden. All right. iPad, share it. Screen mirror. Now, do we see it?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah? Everybody good? Okay. Okie doke. Does anybody need to know how I got the document? No? Everybody's good? Okay.
Yes.
So I pulled it up right under or right above where it says join the Zoom call on the little calendar on the page for today. And then I just opened it up in Notability. You can open it up however you want. Whoopsies. And we're just going to go over probably 2 of the problems. It depends on how much time we have. We'll see how much we can get through. If I go too fast, just holler, okay? If you want clarification on anything, just, again, holler, let me know. So to clarify, it looks like, based on the amount of time we have left, we will have 1 more test, and it will be on natural selection. And that test will have about 5 power standards on it. Excuse me. And 3 of those are right here on this document. Okay. So on the exam, you're going to have to write an experimental question. You're going to have to identify the variables and the constants, and then write a hypothesis. Okay. So maybe people keep coming in and out. So in any case, so that's what we're going to practice today. It's just going over again, how do you make the question? How do you identify the variables? What should it sound like if you want to get a high score on it, and that sort of thing. So the first thing we're going to tackle is just highlighting the paragraph for important information that you need to answer the question. So I'm going to choose yellow because it's easy to see, but I'm going to go back and forth between colors and kind of highlight things differently, at least for this first example. So first thing right off the bat in the example, I'm starting right here with the example. It says there are 2 types of worms, and those 2 types, it says worms that eat at night or are nocturnal, and worms that eat during the day, which are called diurnal. Birds eat during the day. It's kind of an important concept here. Birds eat during the day and seem to be eating only diurnal worms. Nocturnal worms are in their burrows during this time. Each spring when the worms reproduce, they have about 500 babies, but only 100 of these 500 ever become old enough to reproduce. Okay, so here we go. Some things that we have to talk about with natural selection. The whole process of natural selection is to select against would be considered like who in the population is not going to survive. Like which subset of species in the population is going to die off because of something happening in the environment. And then when you see the word for, it's referring to like which population within the species or within the environment is going to increase because they're more fit. Like in your vocabulary words, you had the word fitness. So which set of worms has the most fitness? And that's not to say that they're buff or they go to the gym or they're like, they have a low BMI, but they are fit for the environment. They're like made or tailored to the environment, and they can survive the best in that environment in nature. Okay, so like it says here, the ones that are selected against would be the diurnal worms. That is because these guys, as it says up here, they're the ones that get eaten. Okay, the nocturnal worms, these are the ones that are safe in their burrows at nighttime and they're not getting eaten. Okay, or during the daytime. 5 points here. Let's just go over those real quickly. The 5 points of Darwin's whole theory to natural selection is a population has to have variations. So the population of worms, half of them are nocturnal, half of them are diurnal. Some variations are favorable. So we had said that the nocturnal worms are going to do better. We have that up here, okay, because they don't get eaten. More offspring are produced than can survive. We highlighted that up here in the pink. Those that survive have favorable traits. So the one that survives is that nocturnal worm, and then the population will change over time. So you're going to see the nocturnal worm amount go up, and you should see the diurnal worm go down because they get eaten. Okay. So let's move on with what we need to fill in, and this is basically what you have to do on the test. Okay, you have a scenario that you're going to be given, an environmental situation, populations of animals, and then who's going to live, who's going to die. All of these natural selection scenarios all have to do with which population of organisms is going to live. That's basically all natural selection is. It's who's better fitted to the environment, so whose population is going to increase because they survive and get to reproductive age where they can have offspring and babies, and which population is going to die off because of either human interaction or climate change or something going on in the environment. Okay, so the probably easiest thing to do is to do the variables first. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to do these three first and then go back and do the question. Okay, it's kind of in an opposite order on this page than what I like to do. But no matter, we will figure it out. So I'm going to switch colors here so it's easy to see. So, okay, so independent variable, that is, and I'm just going to write some stuff down here that might help just in case your brain's a little fuzzy and you're not really remembering what an independent variable is. Remember, this is the one that's changed. And usually we talk about that as, if you remember, like probably a zillion times over the course of the year or the semester, however long you've been in the class, I've said like, who's the scientist? And they're like, I'm the scientist because I changed that. Yeah, okay, totally. In this case, you're not changing the environment. You are not going in and you're not a bird eating a bunch of worms, okay? So it's not you this time. It's just something that gets changed. And your dependent variable, I'll write that down here so I don't move up the lines. Your dependent variable is the one that depends on the change or changes in response to the change, if that makes any sense. So the dependent variable goes up or down because of what was changed in the independent variable. And then constants, like we've said a million times, these are things that are staying the same. Okay. So let's dive into this. So we have independent variable. What are the things, what is the change? What, in a lot of these, it might be easier to think of it as what are the options instead of the word change, if that makes sense. I hope it does. So like in this case, make sure I'm not on my marker. So in this case, we've got two types of worms. So I can write the two types of worms. Spelled that wrong. There we go. I forgot the N. So the diurnal worms and the nocturnal worms. I forgot the N over here too. Oops. Okay. I'm having a bad spelling day. All right. So the thing that's changed is that some of the worms are awake and wiggling around during the daytime, and some of them are wiggling around at nighttime. Okay. The dependent variable then would be, well, how does staying awake or staying awake during the day or being awake at night change the worms? It changes how many of them live. So the dependent variable that depends upon the change that we made in the independent variable is the number of worms. Okay. So the number of worms that live depends upon whether or not they are nocturnal or diurnal. Constants would be what is mentioned in, doesn't necessarily have to be mentioned in a paragraph, but most of it is. So they mentioned the season, okay? So we could put down that it mentions, oops, that it mentions the spring season. You could put down, the other thing that is interesting to mention here is that, I mean, let's think about this logically. You've all seen birds. You know what a bird is. Do birds just eat worms? Don't they eat other stuff? Yeah. They eat lots of other things. They'll eat other bugs besides worms. They'll eat plants. They'll eat berries. Again, it depends on the type of bird you're talking about, but we're only talking about one food source. So we're only sticking to worms. So I'm going to write one food up here for that because that's a constant. We're only talking about worms. We're not saying like, are beetles better than worms or worms better than beetles? Like it's just worms. We're just focusing on worms. And then the other thing that isn't mentioned in the paragraph, but again, if you just logically think about experiments, when we do experiments, you want to keep as many things the same as possible. So think of the name of a bird that you know that lives outside. So we could say maybe this, if you were to actually do this experiment and count in an environment space, like how many worms exist, maybe you only focus on robins, okay? Or maybe you focus on cardinals or sparrows or woodpeckers, okay? I mean, if this was woodpeckers, worms wouldn't be an issue because they don't eat worms. They eat larvae in trees. So we're gonna stick with some of those constants. All right, let's move on to question. I'm sorry, let's go back up to question. So when you are writing a question, are we all are we good? Can I move on to question? Is everybody okay? Thumbs up. I don't hear anything, so I'm assuming we're good. I'm gonna move on to making the question. So on your summative, in order to get a decent score on your question, it, number one, has to be a question. So make sure that it ends in a question mark. Number two, make sure that you include your dependent variable, your independent variable, and if you can, try to hit some of those constants, okay? It's not necessary to hit the constants, but the more constants you mention or the more things you mention, the higher your score. So moving into it. So by doing this experiment, what do we want to know? We want to know which worms are going to do better in the environment. Is it the diurnal worms or is it the nocturnal worms? So we can just start with the word which. Which worms? Okay, and it would help your score to make sure that you try to verbalize what you have in your independent and dependent almost exactly like you wrote it down in your hypothesis and in your variable section. So which worms? Nocturnal or diurnal. I'm going to spell it right this time. Not forget that N. Will, and we want to mention now your dependent variable. We want to mention the number of worms. So which worms, diurnal or nocturnal, will increase in number? And if we want to throw in some constants, then we can do that now. We can say which worms, nocturnal or diurnal, will increase in number during spring. Okay. So then I've got my independent variable, my dependent variable, and I threw in some constants. This is going to be a good score. Okay. Now let's go to hypothesis. So your hypothesis is somewhat like your educated guess. Excuse me, your educated guess of the answer to the question. Okay. So we know based on all that reading information that the diurnal worms get eaten a lot. So the nocturnal ones are going to do better. So based on all that reading, that's our background information. We have it right there. The diurnal worms get eaten. So if, and you can go either way with this. You can say if worms are nocturnal, or you could say if worms are diurnal, whichever route you want to take, and then that would change your then. Okay, so I'm going to go with nocturnal. Okay, so if worms are nocturnal, can I make this smaller? Yes. Make that smaller. I feel like I'm writing with a crayon. If worms are nocturnal, and there we have my independent variable, then it's a little better. Then I want to mention those number of worms. Then the number will, is it going to increase or decrease? Well, they're not getting eaten, so they're able to reproduce and have more offspring. So then the number will increase because, and this is where the more information you put, the better. So this is for the because you want to try to, please don't put that here, honey. I'm sorry, I'm in the middle of a meeting, please. You gotta just give me a couple minutes, please. Sorry, 5-year-old. She's trying to serve me pretend food. Anyway, I'll join your picnic in a minute. Okay, so if worms are nocturnal, then the number will increase because, and this is where you want to throw in some information about natural selection, okay? So we could mention this up here, okay? Excuse me, you could mention this here, okay? Completely up to you. So if worms are nocturnal, then the number will increase because they, or we can use those, like I said, those vocab words from the last week, beginning of last week, because they are, I'm gonna get rid of the R because, oops. There we go. Because they have more fitness. I'm going to use that word fitness because I think it's one of your vocab words. And it just means that that population of organisms is more or better adapted to their environment. So you could also mention the word adaptation. You could mention that they have a favorable trait. Okay. You could say that they are naturally selected for. Okay. Any of that stuff is good to put for your because part of the statement, okay? All right, questions about this one? Otherwise, I'm gonna jump into the next example. So at the bottom of every single one of these, you're gonna see a data table and this rewrite hypothesis. We are not going to do that. So you can cross that out for every single example on this worksheet. We're not gonna, you don't need to look at hypothetical data and then rewrite a hypothesis. We don't need to focus on that. So for this next question about the polar bear, you don't have to do any of that, okay? So since we only have 3 minutes, I'm gonna start you off with this one. Feel free to leave if you need to go right after this. But I'll start this example. I'm just gonna keep running with it because I don't have another meeting after this. So if I go 5 minutes after, it's not a big deal for me. But if you have to leave, go for it. Okay, so polar bear example. There are 3 types of polar bears: ones with thick coats, thin coats, and medium coats. It does start mentioning some constants. It says it's fall, soon to be winter. Temperatures are dropping rapidly. The bears have to keep warm or they will freeze to death. Many of the bears have had, as they had 2 cubs each, but due to extreme temperatures, Many mothers only have one cub left. Again, a lot of these examples, I hate to be a Debbie Downer, but a lot of these examples have one animal dying, other one surviving. So it's kind of depressing, but nature, I guess. You know, watch if you ever watch the Lion King with this whole idea of natural selection in mind, it kind of puts a whole new spin on it. What bear will natural selection select against? So this is basically saying which bear is going to die. And then 4 is which bear is going to live. Okay, so which bear out of these bears right here, thick coats, thin coats, or medium coats, is likely to die?
Thin coats.
What do you think?
Thin coats.
I was going to say speak louder, but yes, I heard thin. So the thin coats are probably going to die off. Okay, they're not going to be able to keep warm. Who is going to be selected for?
Thick coats.
Thick coats. So the thicker the coat, the warmer you'll be in these rapidly dropping temperatures that it mentions in the scenario. So thicker coats should prevail. Okay, Darwin's 5 points. Let's do this. So populations have variation. Okay, we put that in yellow up at the top. So my variations are coat thickness. So there's thick coats, thin coats, medium coats. You could write all that on the line or just put thickness. Okay. Some variations are favorable. So this bear that we mentioned right here, that's the favorable one. Having a thick coat, if the temperature gets really low, is favorable. More offspring are produced than can survive. We highlighted that in pink up above. So you have 2 cubs. You okay over there? No. Well, I can't help you right now. So figure it out. I can't. Sorry. Those that survive have favorable traits. So again, these thick bears. Well, I can't help you right now. You're going to have to just wait. And you shouldn't be putting things inside other things. I don't know what you're doing. Oh my God. I'm so sick of, I have never been more thankful for kindergarten teachers in my life. I tell you that right now. Wonderful. This is exactly why I did not go into becoming a kindergarten teacher. I can't take it. It's driving me crazy. Okay. A population will change over time. This basically is saying, just like I've been talking about, one population is going to live, one population is going to die. So somebody's population is going to go up. We assume that it will be the thick bears, and some population, like over here, is going to go down. So we assume all the thin bears are going to die because they're going to freeze to death. Okay, let's get to it. So maybe we need some of that up here so we can see it. Okay, so I'm going to try to change this again. I really want like the thinnest of pens, and it's just not working for me. Okay, so just like we did before, I think it's easier to do independent, dependent, and then constants first. So let's tackle that. So what is your independent variable? What is being changed? What is the change in the bears?
The thickness in coats.
So thickness in coat, or thickness of coat, however you want to say that, or coat thickness, or fur coat thickness, or however you want to say it. Dependent variable, just like all of these natural selection ones, somebody's going to live and somebody's going to die. So you could phrase that as the number that live, the number that survive, the number that die, however you want to, or just the number of bears, period. I think we had the number of worms in the beginning one. You could put number of bears here, okay? Or you could put number that survive or number that die, however you want to phrase it. And then constants would be, again, things that we keep the same. So a couple easy ones to take from the example. There's lots of bears, right? There's grizzly bears, brown bears, black bears. but we're only focusing on polar bears. So that's one constant. We're only talking about one kind of bear. Another one would be the season. So right here, it mentions it's fall, it's soon to be winter, temperatures are falling. Any of that information can be thought of as a constant. So the season, the temp, okay, any of that kind of stuff you can put down as a constant. And then let's go into the question. So the question is always going to be something along the lines of who's going to do better, or who's going to live, or who's going to die. But you can't just say who's going to live or who's going to die. You need to put in, just like I mentioned before, you need to put in these variables, and if you can throw in some constants, the better your score. So what if we started with the word which? What might you put after that?
Which polar bears could survive, like, due to their coat thickness?
Yeah, pretty good. It could be that I didn't hear it because of my volume, but I didn't hear thickness of coat. I did hear number of bears or something about survival. And I did hear the word polar bears, I think. I think you said polar bears, or you just said bears. So let's just be as specific as we can. So which thickness of coat gives polar bears like better survival? Or which thickness of coat gives polar bears a better advantage to survive? Or which thickness of coat gives polar bears the ability to increase in number? I don't know. Any of those would work? Okay. Make sure it ends in a question mark. All right. And then let's go down to hypothesis. I'm going to change the color because there's lots of blue. So hypothesis, if, and we want to talk about the thickness of the coat first. This is always independent variables always first, dependent variables always second. So if a polar bear, I'm going to go polar bear's coat is thick, then, so I hit polar bears, I mentioned my thickness. Now I need to do number of bears and maybe get the season in there somehow. So if a polar bear's coat is thick, then what do we think will happen to the bears?
If they're thick, the population will increase, but if it's thin, the population could decrease due to temperatures.
Exactly, exactly. So let me rephrase what you said because that was good. So if a polar bear's coat is thick, then the population will increase. Right there, I've hit this number of bears. Okay, I mentioned my thickness. I mentioned the word polar bears, and then you even mentioned something about temperature. So let's throw that in there. So if a polar bear's coat is thick, then the population will increase because they are, let's just go with pure logic. The thicker your coat, the warmer you are. So because they are warm and can survive in low temperatures. Period. Okay. All right. Good to go? So there are 2 more examples to go, one about ostriches and one about bunny rabbits. Again, don't bother doing all of this stuff down here. Don't do that, okay? So, whoopsies. So down here on this ostrich problem, don't do that, okay? And then down here on the bunny problem, don't do any of this jazz, okay? You don't need to do that. Don't waste your time. Because like I said, on your test, you're gonna have to do a question, hypothesis, variables, constants, and then you'll have to do a graph on your test, and then you'll have an analysis portion. So it's a couple analysis questions and whatnot. And we're gonna practice that when you guys do a formative next week. Okay?
Okay.
So any questions before I go about either of the examples or anything?
No.
No, you're good, Danny? Okay. All right, Kalia, I know you just joined. I'm gonna have the 7th hour to go over all of this is tomorrow.
Okay.
Okay, so you can join then and then you'll get to see all this stuff and we'll do it together just like I did with these guys.
All right.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, and then I'll probably post this video or the one I do tomorrow during 7th period on Canvas in case you need to see it again. Okie dokies. Okay, message me if you have any questions on anything. Keep up the good work, you two. Both of you I know did the COVID summative, so I'll have those grades in the next day or two so you can see if your grade goes up, okay? All right, bye guys.
Bye.